On today's show, we've got a very skilled winger with kind of a muddy projection. We'll talk about Ryder Ritchie on today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hadi Kalakash, Director of North American Scouting for Dobber Prospects, with Sebastian High, Director of European Scouting and Head Scout for Dobber Prospects. And on today's show, we'll be breaking down Ryder Ritchie's game in detail. Ryder Ritchie's a winger who's been playing for Prince Albert the whole year in the WHL. He's really skilled, but there's some muddiness to his projection. We'll try to kind of clear through the dust and figure out where Ryder Ritchie ends up in his projection. We'll start off with the puck skills in the first segment, shooting, handling, and passing. Then we'll get to the skating and shooting, and physicality as well in the first segment. In our second segment, we'll talk about the more kind of intricate stuff, the decision-making, the habits, the toolkit. That's, I think, where the muddiness flies with Ryder Ritchie, but we'll get into that soon. And lastly, in our final segment, we'll talk about the projection, which NHL team would be the best fit for Ryder Ritchie, and which team would be able to get the best out of him as well, and where he ends up on draft day. Before we get into any of that, though, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOnNHL to get started. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please leave us a rate and review and make sure to make us your first listen of the day. So let's get things started right away with Ryder Ritchie. Give me the profile on Ritchie, size, handedness, where he's been playing, how many points he's put up, and what kind of style he plays.
Yeah, so Ryder Ritchie is a 6-foot, 174-pound right shot forward, mainly playing right wing this season, and he's an August 3rd, 06 birthday, so very young for this draft class. Just a month and a half before the cutoff for the 2025 NHL draft class. He played with the Prince Albert Raiders in the Western Hockey League this season, which is a middling program, a little bit below average in terms of quality of teammates there. And through 47 games this season, he scored 19 goals and 44 points. So just under a point a game margin this season. But that said, he missed 21 games to injury this season, but he was only 13 points off of being the second highest point scorer on his team. So if he'd been fully healthy, he would have been the second top point scorer by a decent margin, only behind Sloan Stanek, who scored 84 points in 68 games this season. So there's a lot of skill in this player. The puck handling is a massive strength. He's a good shooter, a good goal scorer. He's a good playmaker as well. There's a lot to like in the raw tools. So this first segment is going to look at a bunch of the things that he's really, really good at, as well as some question marks in the skating and physicality categories. But let's start off here first and foremost with the puck handling, because it is fantastic. It is what really enables the rest of his offensive game. The fluidity between his puck carrying game and his goals and his shooting and his passing is really what makes him so deceptive and dynamic offensively, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the main standout for me regarding the handling ability is his ability to quickly turn puck receptions into dekes. This isn't a player who really needs a lot of time to figure out what his next move is. And he's really, really skilled. You can see it when he's skating up the ice, when he's carrying that puck. I think pass receptions, I think scanning, those kinds of things, which we'll get into in a bit more detail in a second segment, kind of limit his handling ability. But the way he sets up his shot with his dekes, the way that he kind of turns quick one or two puck touches into setting up the puck in his hip pocket and creating that downforce for a shot is really interesting. Ryder Ritchie's hyper skilled, and I think that really stands out with his handling ability. I'd give his handling ability a 6.5. Definitely above average. The things that hold him back are more kind of intricate, a bit more detailed. Like he kind of struggles to receive passes clean on his stick. He struggles in those areas and that kind of thing. I technically consider that part of the handling skill. But when he gets the puck, when it's secured on his stick, he makes moves that really shock you. He can go between the legs. He can go backhand, forehand, backhand. He's got a great arsenal of skills in his handling skill set. And I think that sets up his passes really well, which we can talk about now. I mean, the passing ability, I wouldn't say he's a pure playmaker, I would say he's a play driver, but he's certainly a good passer. The versatility in his passing is really well. He can pass really efficiently and accurately on the backhand. He can pass. He can make saucers really efficiently. Puts the right weight on his passes and finds seams really well. When he gets his head up, when he's in the offensive zone, when he, let's say, he gets off the boards with the puck and has a second to evaluate his options, he can zip a pass right on his stick cross ice. There's some really good passing ability there. I think that's the main standout for me, but I want to hear your thoughts on the shot, because it's been on and off for me. There have been times where I'm like, wow, Ryder Ritchie might be at least a top 5 shooter in the draft. And other times where I'm like, where did those shooting mechanics go? Like, what happened there? So talk me through what you think about his shot.
I think I've logged more of the positive end of viewings on that front, and you've watched more of him than I have this season. But at least in the tail end of the season, in the games I watched with him, with as well as at the U18 World Championships, I thought that the shooting mechanics were a really big strength in his toolkit. I think that they're also around a 6.5 grade. Again, this is the good viewings of Ryder Ritchie, and the gap between good and bad with Ritchie is certainly quite wide. The inconsistency is one of the reasons that we've been a little critical all season long over at Dopper Prospects, though he did end up a decent amount higher on our final board than our midseason boards throughout the season. But what I like a lot about the shooting is just how little time and space he needs to get off a really dangerous release. His quick snapshot and wrist shot are really dangerous to score from medium to long range, and he is able to blend those shots into his handling so fluidly and so deceptively, which makes him such a dynamic goal scorer, especially against junior competition. How he looks as a goal scorer at the next level, I still have some questions about, but we'll see when that day comes, but he's going to need at least 2 more seasons at the junior level in the WHL, especially being so young for this draft class. He likely will get that time to just marinate. And as Prince Albert becomes a stronger team and he's surrounded by stronger players, or he gets traded, one of those 2 scenarios, I think that we'll see his overall offensive game really flourish. And I'm very excited when that day comes.
Absolutely. I think that it's just a matter of time before that consistency comes. I think the shooting deficiencies aren't really an issue of consistency. I think it's more of an issue of fatigue. I feel like a lot of the times where I've seen Ryder Ritchie take poor shots, kind of lose his leverage and mechanics, mainly situations where he's either going too fast and has to slow down to take a shot, or it's late shift scenarios. I think both of those can have an effect on the way he shoots. But I do want to focus on the skating, because that's a bit of a concern for me. He's definitely a good accelerator. I feel like, once he gets the puck, he's able to separate fairly well in short bursts from opponents. His top speed is decent, but what really worries me is his technique and his mechanics and his habits when he starts the cycle and then gets a puck. There's this tendency to kind of splay his feet out in kind of an A shape, which from that position with his weight on his weight on his heels especially, it makes it really difficult for him to be agile in small space. He really relies on his hands. It reminds me a lot of Alex Galchenyuk in his progression and his development. This is something that was never identified as a concern and eventually led to injuries because he couldn't evade checks as easily. Obviously, there were other circumstances that made him struggle to stay in the NHL. But overall, I think that the main issue with Galchenyuk was that on the ice. His tendency to just splay his feet out and try to deke through in small ice really made it difficult for him to be able to chain together plays, to evade checkers in small ice. So I'd give Ritchie skating a 5 grade, but a 5 grade that really is only elevated by the pure acceleration, the pure power, and his edge work, rather than technique. Because technique-wise, it's a 3.5. It's just he's strong, he's powerful enough in his feet to overcome that, but these things need to be fixed. And we'll get into which team would be able to get the best out of him in the third segment, but I've got an idea already. Last but not least, I do want to talk about the physicality. What did you think of his physical technique in the WHL? I felt like it was decent, but a tiny bit underwhelming. Do you agree?
Yeah, a bit underwhelming. Like there were games where I saw him have a bit of a higher motor and was a bit more physically engaged, and those were the games where the physicality didn't necessarily look like a weakness to me. When he really was trying and putting a lot of work in there, he's not going to be a player that's going to power through opponents. He's far from being a power forward or like a more battle specialist or anything along those lines. But when he's really engaged off puck, he's not necessarily a net negative on the physical front either. He gets under opponents quite well. When he has an active stick, he can really pester opponents on the defensive side of things. And he's a good enough puck handler and passer and shooter that he doesn't on his physicality to create offensively either. But I have seen quite a few situations where he's been just outmuscled by straight up smaller and lighter opponents, even younger opponents in terms of like D-1s. So it's that element's been quite inconsistent in my viewings. I thought at the U18 Worlds, it was probably a stronger performance from the physical side than I was used to seeing from him at the WHL level. But what have you seen on that front?
Yeah, I think that the U18s was a good indication of what Ryder Ritchie can do against his age group. I feel like with Ryder Ritchie, the whole season with Prince Albert was difficult. He didn't have much support offensively, and didn't play a lot of time with Sloan Stanek, if I remember correctly. So on his line, he was kind of tasked with being the play driver, and that didn't really work out as well for him. I see him more as a kind of better complementary player. He's not your pure kind of zone to zone kind of carrier and play driver. He needs to play with smart teammates, and he just didn't have that this season. But that's our first segment done. We'll get into our second where we talk a bit more about the toolkit and habits, the decision making with Ryder Ritchie, how that's a bit of the mud in the situation here, and we'll get into that in just a second. Just a quick word from our sponsors at Policy Genius, first and foremost. Life insurance is such an important safety net for you and your family, and it's really difficult to know which company to go with. Policy Genius helps you sift through the mud and make sure that you get the right life insurance policy for your family. With Policy Genius, you can find life insurance policies that start at just $292 per year for $1 million of coverage. Some options are 100% online as well and let you avoid unnecessary medical exams. With Policy Genius, you got a team of licensed and award-winning agents that help you easily compare your options from America's top insurers in just a few clicks. Their award-winning agents can even walk you through the whole process step by step and let you know exactly what you're covered for. And Policy Genius has no incentive to recommend one insurer over another. You can trust their guidance. You can trust their advice. They know what you're doing for you. To get peace of mind by finding the right life insurance with Policy Genius, head to policygenius.com or click the link in the description below to get your free life insurance quotes and see how much you could save. That's policygenius.com. Alrighty, so let's move on to our second segment. We'll talk about Ryder Ritchie's habits, decision-making toolkit, all the more kind of intricate stuff in his projection. I do want to start with the habits. I think that there's some good and there's some bad here in terms of how he kind of carries himself on the ice. So I think that the main habit that I look for in wingers who play with that level of skill is scanning ability. Because if you're scanning well with the skills that a player like Ryder Ritchie has, you're usually able to make your next play pretty quickly. You're able to separate from opponents quickly and make the right play at the right time with the right kind of weight on your pass, weight on your shot, that kind of thing. I don't see as much scanning as I would like to see with Ryder Ritchie, which is kind of why I see him more as a complementary player. Because he's not a player who's going to kind of chain together plays at a high end level. He's not a player who's going to play give and goes, but not to a level that you see, for example, from a Liam Greentree or a Beckett Seneca or some of these other CHL wingers. With Ryder Ritchie, it's more of a get the puck, make a deke, look up, make the next play type of situation. I want to see that fixed. I think that's a part of what makes Ritchie a bit less efficient than other wingers in the CHL. But again, at the U18 Worlds, we saw a very engaged, very intense, very hard-working Ryder Ritchie who could chain together plays fairly well and give and go. So it depends on the viewings, but I'd say the U18 Worlds aren't the highest level of competition. And I feel like the competition that Ritchie faced in the WHL is a better indicator of what he becomes at the next level. But I do want to hear you on maybe some other habits that you've seen from Ryder Ritchie in your viewings and where the concern lies, or what do you see as kind of really good in terms of habits from him.
I think you already hit a bit of it, of the things that I really like. In that he has a lot of habits that I think would support a really interesting projection as a complementary player. I agree that there's a lot of habitual concerns in terms of projecting a play driving winger here, and he had a bit of a play driving role this season. So we saw those questionable habits shine a lot brighter than they perhaps should have and would have if he were in a stronger program than Prince Albert this year. But because he reads off of his teammates really well, because he's able to use his handling to solve complex problems in flashes really effectively, rather than using it as like the primary offensive weapon on his line, which was happening a bit too often at the WHL level this season, and was exploiting him a little bit to making mistakes more often. I think that with higher end line mates, and he played with higher end line mates at the U18 Worlds, and that was one thing that I was really keeping an eye on, was just how he was combining with his teammates in that tournament. He was playing a bottom six role the entire tournament, but he still scored 4 goals and 8 points in 7 games. He was one of Canada's top depth scorers at that tournament for good reason. And a lot of the offense was not being driven by him, but flowing through him on his line, where he was very much connecting the line in the offensive zone. He was finding the soft ice. He was being that finisher, but also play creator in the offensive zone without necessarily having the entire burden of leading the rush and being that fulcrum in the offensive zone, because he was still playing with such high skill line mates. And that was one thing that was really promising to me that I saw at that tournament, was his actual tape playing with really, really high end players, which was quite missing at the WHL level.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the main standout, is when he was placed in a role that fits better with the way that he plays, we saw a completely different Ryder Ritchie than we saw this year in Prince Albert. And I think that's where the projection lies. In terms of decision making, what I really like is that he kind of lets play develop. He's not a player who forces plays down lanes. He's not a player who kind of accelerates plays needlessly or kind of slows down the play needlessly. A lot of what he does has a purpose with the puck. He's a player who can identify middle lanes really well, and he can open them up really well. If he's skating down the boards, let's say on the right side of the ice, he's able to stop up or cut back and kind of hook a pass under a stick right to a trailing, let's say, defender who's gaining the slot, that kind of thing. Those are kind of little habits and decisions that I really like from Ritchie. But I think on the flip side of that, his decision-making defensively, there's something wrong with it. The way that he occupies lanes in the defensive zone, his decision-making when it comes to kind of joining board battles, when there's kind of a swarm going on where you've got 3 opponents down low around the puck with both defensemen in the corner. There are situations where I've seen Ryder Ritchie just kind of stand there instead of creating an overload when he should have created an overload. And there are other times where he shouldn't have created an overload, but he just jumps into a board battle because he sees an opportunity to get the puck. And next thing you know, it's on an opponent's stick and the offensive cycle continues. So there's kind of an issue with decision-making for me defensively, but the work rate's there, the engagement's there. When Ryder Ritchie's on, he's a really hard worker. He puts in second and third efforts. I'm not too worried about that part of things. But I do want to focus on the toolkit. I think that there's a clear disconnect between skating and hands with Ritchie. Between the puck skills themselves, between the handling of the shooting, the handling of the passing, you've already talked about how good that gels. But for me, as soon as you incorporate skating into it, as soon as Ryder Ritchie's moving, as soon as he's moving his feet or speeding up or slowing down, there's a clear struggle with securing pucks and making plays for me. Would you agree with that assessment?
I would. I think it's one of the reasons that we've seen him kind of employ that A-frame style of skating in the offensive zone on the cycle, because it's where his puck handling can shine the brightest. It's where he feels the most free to dangle, and he loves to dangle in the offensive zone, which means that he employs that A-frame stance really regularly. And I saw that as well at the U18s a lot, and it's also a skating stance that, I mean, you already delved into a lot of the details there, but it's something that also facilitates the opponents of pushing him to the perimeter because he lacks that mobility that he has when he is moving at higher speeds. But yeah, like blending the puck handling and the skating has certainly been a bit iffy this season. That said, I've seen flashes of it working really nicely, especially when he's skating in a linear fashion. As soon as you start employing like delays and stops and lateral shifts in his skating routes, it starts to break down a little bit more. But if we're talking about pure transition type of puck handling, where he's mainly skating in a straight line and he's using his acceleration to blow past, I've seen it look pretty decent in those situations, but those are very, very sheltered type of situations for that blend between those two tools that will be even more limited at the NHL level.
For sure. And for those listening who skate often and play hockey, play ice hockey a bunch, focus on, if you see a player occupy that A stance, focus on two things. Are their feet anchored? So, are they able to move their feet freely? And second, where's their center of gravity? I think those are the two concerns with that A-frame. Is A, it anchors your feet, it puts them in place. It's a stance that's made for you to keep your balance and be able to weave rather than cross over and lower your center of gravity. That's the second thing, is the center of gravity stays up. When you see a player like William Nylander, for example, when he's dangling, when he's steeking, it's all crossover. It's just all low center of gravity, which makes it really easy for him to weave through pressure and avoid checks in tight spaces. When you're in that A shape, your feet are anchored. The most you can do is change your route slightly, but your feet are staying in that stance. You can't really move your feet as well from that position. So those are the two concerns with that A stance, and I think that that's something that teams should focus on immediately. The sooner the better. That wraps things up for our second segment. We'll get into our third, where we talk a bit more about Ryder Ritchie's projection, his upside, which team would be the best fit, and where he ends up on draft day. We'll get into that in just a sec. Just before, a quick word from our sponsors at FanDuel.
Summertime means baseball, the NBA Finals, the Stanley Cup Finals, and far more. And you can bet on it all with FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 that you can bet on everything from the Finals MVP to who you think is going to hit the next one out of the park. You can even take those swings on the NHL Stanley Cup Finals, which are now in full swing between the Edmonton Oilers and the Florida Panthers. Whether you want to take your swings on the stars of the league, like Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl with the Edmonton Oilers, or a shutdown goaltender like Sergei Bobrovsky to make big saves when it matters the most, the choice is yours with FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.
Alrighty, so let's move on to our final segment here for Ryder Ritchie. We'll talk about Ryder Ritchie's projection, his upside, what a realistic kind of middling of his upside would be, and overall which team would be the best fit for him. We'll get into, first and foremost, the upside. I think with Ryder Ritchie, there's a lot of different scenarios. I think there's a chance Ritchie doesn't work at the NHL level, plays maybe 40, 50 games, and then kind of middles as an AHLer. That's the worst case scenario, I think, with Ryder Ritchie. Best case scenario, though, I mean, how high are we talking? I could see a top sixer here if he works out well, but it would very much be as a complimentary top sixer, a complimentary skilled top sixer, to be precise. We're not talking a Zach Hyman type. That's a whole different ball game. Ryder Ritchie doesn't have his physicality, his board game, his intensity or work rate, which I think Zach Hyman's the hardest work in the NHL, if I'm honest. His work rate is off the charts. Ritchie's not there. He's a different type of potential top six complimentary scorer. But yeah, do you think there's a chance he ends up as a complimentary player on the top line? Like, is that a possibility with Ritchie?
I think it's a possibility, even if it's improbable. I think like second line complimentary skilled player, be putting up 60 to 65 points a season in his prime is kind of like the plausible upside here. But if he really hits it out of the park, if he uses that extra year of development that he basically has compared to other draft eligibles in this year, because he is an August birthday for this draft class, and uses that to like absolutely like bump his stock massively, maybe we start to see that top line upside be unlocked again in a complementary capacity, complementing intelligent players that can drive play, where he's able to take a bit of a back seat and shine with the puck touches he does have, rather than having a responsibility to do particular things with those puck touches, and allow his creativity to shine and blossom in that type of role. I think it's possible. He'd have to definitely up his effort level to a more consistent level where it is like well above plus level in order to fulfill that role. But I think that it's within the margin of possibilities, even if I'd give it maybe a 5 to a 10% chance of fully hitting.
For sure. I think that's the main standout for me with Ritchie, is like, I would say the main reason why we're not as high on him at Dobber Prospects is because we're not as confident in his projection. I'm not really confident that he does become a top sixer. I think that's the upside for sure. I think that's the best case scenario if he falls with the right team, if he ends up, if the right team spends the right investment on him, kind of developing the things that he needs to learn, that A stance, learning to be a bit more deceptive with the puck, learning to take pucks in motion and move them up the ice, working on his defensive game. But there's still a lot of development objectives. I think his skill is very much up there with the best in this draft. It's probably top 10 in this draft if you're looking at the pure puck skills. But it's everything around that I think needs a lot of work. He's still engaged. He's got good work rates. He's got good habits and decisions, as we've mentioned, but they're not at a level that can compete with the best in this draft, and that's why we have him. I think he ended in the outside the top 30 for us for sure at Dobber Prospect. So 32 exactly. So for me, it's just I don't know. That's the difficult thing with me is I'm not really confident, and if I'm an NHL team looking to draft Ryder Ritchie with the first round, this is a big vote of confidence for your development squad. This is a big vote of confidence towards the people that work with your prospects to be able to develop them and work on the right things with them. This is saying, I trust you guys. I know you guys are going to do a good job with him. And you need a good development team with him. That's for sure. So in terms of fits, let's look at them right now. I think this is right down Montreal's alley. They've added Adam Nicholas in the past couple of years, who has been a key part in revolutionizing Juraj Slafkovsky's skating stance, his ability to battle for pucks, to kind of lower his center of gravity and move through checks. He's improved Slafkovsky's shot as well. He's worked with him on that. Adam Nicholas is, I think, the perfect person to work with Ryder Ritchie, personally. I think that if any team, Montreal picks at 26th with their second pick, the one they got from Winnipeg, that's a great spot for him. I think that's a great option there. What do you think, though, about the fit with Montreal?
I think it makes a lot of sense. I think there's a lot of players that the Montreal Canadiens could plausibly add in that slot. I think Andrew Basha would also come to mind as a really Montreal-style player out of the WHL there. But the team that I was actually eyeing, apart from Montreal, was the Dallas Stars at 29th overall. Another team that has a bunch of trust in their development staff and likes to take swings on toolsy like CHLers with an upward trajectory that are also likely young for the draft class. We've seen the wonders they've done with drafting Wyatt Johnston and Logan Stankoven, and I think that while stylistically quite different, Ryder Ritchie is it could be up that alley in terms of a high upside swing on really high end tools and a developing and blossoming hockey sense and physical game that has progressed a decent amount in the last year, and he's also playing in a poor program. And if he were playing, for instance, with Prince George rather than Prince Albert, would he be a consensus top 20 player? Maybe. And if the Dallas Stars think he would be and take that swing, I think they could get a really high value asset out of this player.
For sure. I fully agree on the Dallas fit. I think that's a great option for the Stars there. And again, really a player that they can work with. And they've got a long track record of developing kind of difficult projection type of players into bona fide NHLers. You mentioned Johnston and Stankoven. I'm thinking of Jason Robertson as a player who needed to improve his skating, who had intelligence, who had the work rate, who had the skill, but just really needed to work on his skating ability and add a couple tools to his toolkit there. And look at him now. I mean, he's looking the part of a franchise defining winger. Like, he's really good. I'm not saying Ryder Ritchie is going to become Jason Robertson. Don't quote me on that, but he's kind of got the same profile, and I think that the Dallas Stars would be a fantastic fit there. I do also want to throw Toronto's name in there just because we know how good their development program is, and I think that it's about time that they add some minimum salary kind of rookies to their roster as they're trying to compete, and finally add someone else than the big three, the big four, who can actually put the puck in the back of the net and produce. That's kind of been their issue for the longest time. And I think that Ritchie could be kind of a really good middle six winger for them who puts up 50 points and does a good job there if they choose to go that route. And they have, again, a really good development team. So I think that they can really work. I think that Barb Underhill can do wonders for Ryder Ritchie's game as well. So that's another option. But that wraps things up for today's show. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you think of Ryder Ritchie. if you want your team to pick him up and what you thought of our episode. If you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please leave us a rating review and make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, please check out Locked On Sports Today to get all your news and updates about what's going on around sports on YouTube's first 24/7 news channel. And make sure to tune in for our next shows as we continue our prospects coverage for the month of June. This has been Hadi Kalikesh, Director of North American Scouting for Dobber Prospects, with Sebastian Hyde, Director of European Scouting for Dobber Prospects, and we hope you tune in next time.